slides first. So you see my slides now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present my paper, The Cost of the Cold Start Problem on Airbnb, here in this great virtual seminar. This is joint work with Florian Dendorfer. He's also at the University of Toronto, and we're currently actually revising the first draft of this paper. So all of your comments are very much appreciated. We're very much looking forward to hearing your feedback. So what is this paper about? Well, this paper is basically taking the cold start problem to a market setting and trying to understand whether, to what extent the cold start problem is still a problem when we take into account the endogenous supply side. So what exactly is the cold start problem? Effectively, it's a public goods problem, where the public good is information, right? And specifically, we talk about information in terms of reviews. So think about your favorite platform, Amazon, Airbnb, Uber, Temu. We have just so many products there, and the reviews are very valuable in order for us to be able to discern high quality products from low quality products. But the value of these reviews is heterogeneous, right? So having an additional review for a product that has already 1,000 reviews, that doesn't really reveal a lot of additional information, but an additional review for a product that has very few or even no reviews is very valuable to us in order to allow us to understand the quality of the product. At the same time, these reviews are user-generated, right? So they're not provided by the platform, but somebody else has to have bought it before and kind of written a review such that we can actually consume this information. And because we as consumers, we don't act as one single long-lived consumer internalizing these externalities, this is like a very standard traditional market failure, right? We don't internalize the externalities. And so this suggests that there might be too few potentially reviews for these early entrants. So there is a low speed of social learning because we don't explore these entrant products sufficiently. Okay. This logic, however, doesn't take into account the supply side. So, of course, also sellers are aware of this mechanism. And new sellers may want to set low prices because they know it's important to accumulate these first reviews, and then kind of being able to monetize on these reviews. At the same time, whether it's very hard or easy to accumulate these first reviews to like surpass this first hurdle will also affect entry and exit. And this may kind of moderate or mediate this cold start problem that we have, and maybe even completely compensate it. Now, platforms seem to think that sellers don't do this sufficiently, right? So here is an example from Amazon, for instance, where they have these recommendations for their sellers, and this is the seller center, that new products should be priced lower, in particular when they have no reviews. And this is kind of want to stimulate these early sales. This is also true for Airbnb. Okay, so these platforms seem to want to kind of make these sellers kind of set lower prices because they think they don't do this enough. They don't internalize this enough. And so in this paper, we effectively ask the question, so is this true? When we take the supply side into account, do we still have under exploration, and should we still incentivize consumers to explore more? Okay. So the basic outset of this paper, what do we do is, in order to answer the question, we put these insights to a structural model. So we estimate a structural model of demand and supply on Airbnb in Manhattan. We have data on the time periods 2016 to 2019. In our model, consumers are short-lived. They go in for one period, see what the reviews are on the platform, and make their decisions, whatever they prefer best. Sellers, on the other hand, are long-lived, and they decide on prices, entry and exit based on their expectations on how this also affects their future demand and profits. Then for the host costs, what we do to estimate them is we use this approximation by Rountree, Bankert, and Roy, and solve for the oblivious equilibrium. And then weights with these parameters, we can do our first counterfactuals where we try to approximate socially optimal price changes. So we try to understand, should entrants indeed decrease their price? And would this lead to an increase in welfare? And we find that the rental price of listings with at most one review, so the entrant listings, should indeed be 17% lower, and the rental price of listings with more than 15 reviews should be 10% higher. And this would lead to a welfare increase that is equivalent of around 8% of the total monthly host revenue in Manhattan. So this would increase to an increase that's kind of relatively sizable. So the structure of the paper is fairly standard, so I'm not going to outline all these points, and let's dig right into it in the interest of time. So we see our contribution to the literature, both in the theoretical and the empirical. There has been a lot of theoretical work on the cold start problem, in particular in the mechanism design literature. For instance, Jay and Herner show that introducing exploration into a recommender system increases welfare, exactly because the consumers, they don't solve this optimal exploration trade-off, they just exploit, and so there is kind of a role for the social planner to induce kind of exploration. But this takes the supply side as given, and so there's work by Dirk Bergeman and Välimäki to also introduce endogenous seller pricing, and they do indeed show that this alleviates under-exploration or may even lead to over-exploration. Okay, Velodi also has a model where he has entry and exit in a model like this. Now we think we contribute by combining all of it, right? So we have the this externality on the consumer side. We have seller pricing. We also have horizontal differentiation, not only vertical differentiation, as in Velodi, and entry and exit. And in a model where this kind of relatively realistic market feature all are present, we want to understand, is the cold start problem still a problem? We also contribute to the empirical literature on dynamic oligopoly, in particular on the literature that analyzes prices as investment decision. So usually in these models, the reason for price serving as the role of investment is learning by doing, network effects, switching costs, these kind of things. Now, in our case, the link between current and future demand are the reviews, right? So pricing affects the reviews and this links current and future demand. But the difference is that this effect on future demand is ex ante uncertain. So, I mean, a bad review can also decrease your future demand, right? And so there is a bit of uncertainty about that. All right. So having set up the stage, let's just dig into the model, okay? As I mentioned, consumers are short-lived. They just make their decision based on their indirect utility of renting a listing. So we're in a setting of Airbnb, and this is their indirect utility function. Now, most of these components are fairly standard, right? So we have the price here, which affects what consumers pick. There has the platform fee here as well. We have an unobserved demand shock, which, well, as a standard, leads to attenuation bias in the price coefficient or upwards bias. And we also allow for different type shocks. Now, what is different, or what we add here to this like standard logit demand framework, is the expectation about the quality of the listing. And here we assume, or about the experience that the consumer will have once he stays in a listing. And we assume that this experience is either good or bad. And so consumers leave reviews that are either good reviews or bad reviews. And the expectation about the quality is beta distributed with parameters A and B. This allows us to have a very simple kind of functional form for the posterior expectation about the quality when the consumer sees the good and bad reviews for listings. In particular, the expected quality is just A plus the number of good reviews that the listing has over A plus B plus the number of total reviews that a listing has. And so we can already see when the listing gets a good review, right, the posterior is going to move the prior up, like they expect the reviews will move the prior upwards. If the review is bad, then our posterior will be lower than the prior. We also, in Airbnb, one important feature is that listings are capacity constraints. Well, only one person can stay in a hotel room or like in an Airbnb at any time, right? At any single day. And so this is kind of, what does it introduce here? It means that the probability of being booked is the probability of at least one consumer being interested in staying in this listing. And this then depends on market size. So we have to make some assumptions on the market size in our setting. And we assume that the arrival rate of consumers is Poisson distributed with the mean mu. That gives us a nice functional form for the probability of being booked, which is 1 minus the exponential of minus mu SJT. SJT is effectively just the expected market share of listing J and T in a world without capacity constraints, right? So we translate kind of the typical market shares in the logit demand framework into the probability of being booked when the market size is mu with this Poisson distributed market size. So this then means that we can quantify the transitions from different states. So because we also we're moving now closer to the supply side, so we have to understand what is the state space. In our setting, the state space is the number of good reviews, the number of total reviews, and the listing type. So we allow state transitions to differ by different types. And what are these transitions? Well, a listing can get a good review, a bad review, or no review at all. Okay, what's the probability of getting a good review? I just showed you what the demand is. That's basically the probability of being booked, times the probability that this person that books this listing also leaves a review, times the prior. Because we're in a Bayesian world, the expected posterior is equal to the prior. And so we know what the transition probability here is. The probability of a bad review is very similar. It's also, again, the demand times the review probability times 1 minus the prior. So it's basically just this person having a bad experience, then they will submit a bad review. And the probability of no review is the complement of these two probabilities. So because not everybody leaves a review, even, of course, when somebody books a listing, it could happen that you don't get a review in the next period. All right. Now, of course, the state transitions also depend then on entry and exit, because they also give us kind of how many sellers are gonna leave in every specific state. So let's move to the supply side of the model. In each period, we assume that there is a finite number of potential hosts, big J, and we have active hosts and inactive hosts. Now, active hosts, they set a rental price and they receive the per period revenue. They also observe a random idiosyncratic cost shock of operating the listing. And we assume that that is exponentially distributed. And then they decide whether they want to exit or not at the end of the period. Okay. So effectively, they solve these equations, right? When they set the price, they, of course, maximize current profit, but they also take into account what this price will mean for their future value function. So that's the value function of the seller, right? And they also have to take into account the expectation of this and trade it off with the cost draw of operating the listing. And so this is then the exit rate that we observe. So the probability of exiting is then given by this expression, which is the expected value of the next period discounted over the mean parameter of the exponential distribution. We also have inactive hosts, and inactive hosts also observe an idiosyncratic entry cost shock that is exponentially distributed and decide whether they want to enter or not in the next period. And so this entry rate, the probability of entry, is then given by this expression, given by the exponential distribution. So entrants make an expectation of what their value is once they enter, and when they enter, of course, they enter with the state no good reviews and no total reviews, right? They know their type, and then they divide it by for the entry rate, we divide it by the parameter of the entry cost distribution. I want to point out the different specific assumptions that we make here. Oh, sorry. And then, of course, then after this, the reviews are determined, and then we have the transition to the next state. But this is kind of like the timeline of each particular period on the seller side. Okay. I want to make some kind of remarks on the assumptions that we make here. So first, we assume that there is no private information, so the seller actually has the same information as the consumer. Okay. And this rules out that prices serve as a sort of signaling device for some unobserved type, okay? Because we want to focus on price as investment, right? So they said the pricing incentives incorporate this effect on the reviews in the future. And then with the endogenous market entry and exit, the old model also captures how the cold start problem affects the number of active listings. Now, this game, in principle, has a perfect Markov equilibrium, but we have lots of hosts in each particular period. So we have like thousands of hosts in each particular period that compete against each other. So we think that the approximation of an oblivious equilibrium makes sense here. And what does it mean? So what do we say when we say we approximate by the oblivious equilibrium? So first, what it gives us is that each single seller only has to keep track of their own states and of the kind of like aggregate market state, okay? So this means that they choose their strategies just taking into account this long-run average industry state, but they don't take into account strategic effects on competitors' future decisions, right? So currently, of course, they set prices just via normal Bertrand, taking into account the future, but they don't take into account that when I price low now, I get a review, but my competitor doesn't, and so my competitor will also price differently in the future, right? These kind of things, we assume that these sellers just are ignorant about this and don't only think about the effect on their own future pricing decision and assume that the market is kind of like in steady state also tomorrow. Okay. All right, so let's get into the data. So that's our model. In order to estimate it, we use data from AirDNA on all Airbnb listings in Manhattan, New York. As mentioned, from the years 2016 to 2019. So this is before COVID. And also, there is no ban on Airbnb in place yet. So we're looking at listings that are as homogeneous as possible. So we're focusing on listings where a maximum 2 guests are allowed, no pets, entire apartments, 1 bathroom, bedroom, at least 1 picture. And then we clean the data and aggregate it to the monthly level for the demand estimation. And with this kind of cleanup, we have rental rates, booking, number of reviews and ratings for around almost 8,000 listings and 63,000 listing month observations. Now, of course, in the data, we just have the rating and the number of reviews. So we translate this into what is the number of good reviews implied by this rating and the number of total reviews. Okay, so K is then just the number of 5-star reviews required to achieve this observed average rating for each particular listing, when N minus K is the number of 1-star reviews. So that's kind of how we translate these model assumptions into the data. We also estimate types in a separate fixed effects regression. So I was saying that we have observable types. You can think about it as economy, low scale, mid scale, luxury listings. Okay. Now we're currently revising in a revised version. We incorporate this all into one estimation, effectively using fixed effects and the demand estimation. But just so you know, so the idea is with these types to capture some observed quality, right? That luxury types they are just higher quality and they can charge higher prices and still have high demand. Okay.
Regina, can
Yeah.
a quick question about sort of just the size of the cold start problem. So like
Yeah.
how many new listings on any given month appear that need to solve that problem against, you know, a potential really large number of listings that have already gained their reputation signal?
So I will show you the state distribution later, but there are roughly 15% of listings at any given time that don't have any reviews. Now, whether they just entered last month or not, I would have to check. But that's kind of roughly the size. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Okay. All right. So, and then we also have to calibrate some parameters for the estimation. So, first of all, we assume the discount factor, which is important, of course, for the seller decisions, is 0.995. This corresponds roughly to an annualized interest rate of 6.7%. The revenue fee is the observed revenue fee that Airbnb was setting at the time, which is 14.2%. The arrival rate of consumers in the results that I'm showing you today is 10,000. Now, we are currently microfounding this and looking for more data on the number of people staying in hotels and so on. And then as we see it so far, we'll get an arrival rate of consumers actually that's closer to 20,000. So this may kind of like a little bit underestimate the number of consumers coming in, even though it doesn't really affect our estimates too much, but just kind of keeping this in mind. The review probability now is kind of the review probability of having a review in the next period when your whole month is booked, right? Remember, we are kind of aggregating on the monthly level. Okay, so that's why this seems kind of high, but it corresponds to roughly 20% probability of each single stay resulting in a booking. And we also have to cap the number of reviews. And in the results I'm showing you, we cap it to 20 to make the state space manageable, but we're currently also increasing it to 50. Okay, I mean, 20 is still, I think, like reasonable, because an additional review, when you have 20 already, I will show you how much it affects demand, and the effects are very small. But in order to maybe also still better capture the decrease also on the long tail, we're increasing it to 50. And then we also have to make a stance of what is the set of potential entrants here, what is the number of potential listings. And we were setting it to 10,000 for the results I'm showing you. But again, here we're looking into numbers of vacant apartments in Manhattan, and like how many of these could be, you know, transferred into Airbnb listings to also microfound this number. So for the demand estimation, then we invert the demand and estimate the parameters using GMM, fairly standard. We use instruments, of course, for the rental price. So the instrument for the rental price is the average reservation length of the listing, with the idea that if a listing has generally very short stays, there is an additional kind of cost of communicating with the new guests and like kind of guaranteeing a smooth transition between guests and stuff like that. For the number of good reviews, that's also endogenous in our setting. Why? Well, because it depends on demand in the past, and if demand in the past is correlated with demand in the present, right? So then also here we have an endogeneity problem, and we use the diminutive lags of the occupancy rate as an instrument for that, with the idea that kind of we want to just capture unexpected shocks to occupancy rate. So we take out the mean occupancy rate for a particular listing, and only if this listing had like more than usual bookings like last month or a few months ago, we take this variation to explain the number of good reviews. For the prior estimates, we use a functional form that allows these estimates to the parameters to be unbounded, because A and B are positive, and with GMM it's kind of like we would have to do some bounded stuff. So we take this functional form And so we estimate actually psi and iota, and psi and iota are allowed to vary from -infinity to infinity. All right. And these are then our results. So without instrument and with instruments, I just want to, I'm showing you this mainly to show that the price coefficient is indeed bigger in size with the instruments, right? Roughly ×4. And then for the type specific, so this is like kind of the fixed effect relative to the outside option of booking a hotel. And so we see that type 4, which is a luxury listing, is kind of better, or like compared to the economy listing, right? Now these prior estimates, iota and psi here, imply a prior belief about quality if a listing doesn't have any review of around 4.15 stars. Okay, and this compares to an average on the platform that we have, which is 4.5. So kind of the average listing on the platform is 4.5 stars. Now, if you see something that doesn't have any reviews, you think that's worse, and in particular, like around 4.15 stars. The average own price elasticity is -1.04. Let me, okay. So these estimates then imply this kind of maybe goes a little bit towards the question of what is the effect of an additional review, and does it actually like decrease in the number of reviews? So here we show you that in the data for a listing that has no reviews, what's the effect on demand if these reviews get an additional good one, okay? And this will increase demand by 6% in the data. For listings with 1 review, this is also very close, and then it decreases. When a listing has 20 reviews, the increase in demand from an additional good review is only around 0.5%. So this kind of mirrors this value of information that is heterogeneous, and in particular decreasing with the number of reviews. So then in the cost estimation, we estimate the cost of parameters by using maximum likelihood, and we target the state distribution, right? So we try to maximize the probability that we actually observe the distribution across states that we have in the data. Based on the demand estimates, this means that we repeatedly solve the model for different parameter values. What does it exactly mean? It's like we initially make a guess of the equilibrium rental prices, state distribution, and value function. And based on this guess, then we update the rental price, right? We solve kind of the game of setting of best response functions for those listings. With the new prices, we can update the value function. With the value function, we can compute the new exit and entry rates. We can update the state distribution, and then we revise this guess, and we iterate over these steps until we converge. Okay, so that's how we estimate the cost. We allow these cost estimates to be type specific. And so our estimates, I'm not showing you the actual estimates because these are kind of cost draws for a lot of potential listings that don't really enter. So they're relatively high, right? And the costs that I'm showing you are the costs that are actually incurred, right, by listings that actually enter and exit. And so the average entry cost for listings that enter range from 1,500 to close to 5,000. So this is, you can think of the cost of converting an apartment into an Airbnb. And the average operating costs, these are the monthly kind of fixed costs that you have to incur to keep the Airbnb going. They range from, for low type, 1,300 to close to $4,000. Now, you can think of this as what's the operating costs, maybe like renting the apartment in New York, Manhattan. So, well, 1,400 is pretty low for rent in New York, right? But close to 4,000 may be more reasonable. So, I mean, these are different types. So we think of them as fairly reasonable estimates. Exactly. And I was promising you to show the actually state distribution. So we also look at the model fit, of course. So what we're actually targeting with our maximum likelihood is here. This is the state distribution, okay? And this has this pitchfork shape. Here, these are these close to 15% I was telling Chiara before that don't have any reviews, right? And then we have another peak here at 20, but that's kind of artificial because we're capping the number of reviews at 20, okay? And when we have more, then this peak will probably be smaller. And this is the number of listings that we get from our model, and it's the distribution. And it's fairly similar. And I mean, it's not surprising because this is kind of like the moments that we're targeting effectively, okay? When we're looking at the rating distribution, so what we see here is the orange lines. These is the model, right? These are the ratings that we observe in the model, and we see that there is a really high share of 5-star reviews. That compares to data ratings that are not as extreme, right? So we have also some 4.6 and 4.8. We think that this is because we're capping at 20, right? So in the model, that's why after you have like 25-star reviews, you kind of stop accumulating reviews. And when we kind of move up this threshold to 50, we hope to have a better fit here. And the estimated prior distribution looks more like this. These are like the red bars. And in terms of other parameters, we think we're doing a fairly good job. So the average number of active listings in the data is 1,200. In the model is kind of close to that. The share of unreviewed listing in the model is a little bit higher. The average rating is fairly similar. The average number of reviews is a bit smaller. The rental price is fairly similar. The occupancy rate is very similar. The only moment where we are digging into what the reason is for this is the exit rate. So we have in our model, the dynamics are much bigger. So there's much more exit happening in our model compared to the actual data. So I have, I think, 5 more minutes left. So let's dig into the counterfactuals. And in the counterfactual, basically, what's the idea? We want to understand, well, if we could kind of impose or force hosts to change their prices, right? Would we actually want to have lower prices for new listings compared to incumbent listings? And would this be, so basically this would mirror the fact that we actually have a setting where entrants are still pricing too high? And would we be able to achieve a substantial welfare gain with that? Now, we have 924 states here, and we can't really solve for 924 optimal prices. So to make this problem manageable, we employ an approximation by using a combination of review-dependent per booking subsidies, so this means or taxes, with the lump transfer. So we have these per booking subsidy taxes that are supposed to incentivize sellers to change their prices. And then effectively, we, with the lump sum transfers, we deduct again whatever they got or they received, such that it's approximately as if we would force them to set a different price. Okay, and that's revenue equivalent, of course. We set 5 different review intervals, right? Such that we have only 5 different per booking subsidies or taxes potentially. And the review intervals that we're having is 0 to 1 review, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 20. So we have these interviews that are kind of a bit bigger on the upper side of the number of reviews. But we want to avoid that these results are conflated with a change in overall demand. So we don't want that aggregate prices are shifting dramatically and being much higher or much lower, because this would affect welfare, of course, for reasons beyond the COSA problem. And so we constrain these taxes and subsidy to be 0 on average, okay? Because otherwise we could just think like, okay, there's market power on the platform, so the social planner would just want to decrease all the prices or whatever. And we don't want to attribute this to the COSA problem. Okay. And these are our results. So the optimal tax subsidy scheme implies that for listings with 0 or 1 reviews, the average rental price should be almost 17% lower, right? And this kind of also listings with 2 to 5 reviews should charge a little bit of a lower price, but starting from 6 reviews, listings should actually charge a somewhat higher price, in particular when they have 16 to 20. Now, this translates, of course, to an average occupancy rate that is higher for listings with no reviews. And this means that they are going to transition faster to kind of the next state. And then in reverse is lower for listings with many reviews. How does the state distribution change? Well, the number of listings with no reviews is substantially decreasing in this counterfactual. And we think that this is because of two reasons. Well, one is the one that I just said before. We have a higher occupancy rate for these listings, and so they're just faster in accumulating reviews, and they're faster in exiting this kind of entrance stage. On the other hand, however, we're forcing them to charge a price that is lower than what they would have done individually, like optimizing by themselves, right? And so this reduces the profits that they're making, and so they have lower entry incentive in this counterfactual. Okay. How does it affect total welfare? Well, in this counterfactual, the total welfare increases by around $340,000 per month. And this all of it comes from consumer surplus, effectively. So consumers surplus increases by $350,000. Airbnb hosts lose out because we're forcing them kind of to do something that they don't want to really do. Airbnb revenue is also a bit increasing, but not too much. And so all of it comes from consumer surplus. And just kind of to put these numbers into perspective, the total host revenue per month in Manhattan is around $4 million. So this is around 8.5% of that. We also have a second counterfactual, which we think is kind of maybe easier and more in line what we think we would do, because maybe we don't want the incumbents to force them and increase their price, right? Like that's what I was showing you before, right? We're kind of imposing price changes on everyone. Maybe we just want to impose price changes on the entrants. And these are the ones that have no reviews, right? And mirroring what Amazon kind of wants to do, but from a perspective of social welfare and not platform revenue, of course. And so here in this counterfactual, we kind of only impose price changes on the entrant, and we allow other hosts to respond to this in an individually optimal way. Now, because we have more degrees of freedom here, we allow for different optimal prices for different entrant types. And so the optimal price decrease here then ranges from 8% to around 15%, depending on the type. Also, so this kind of increases again social learning, but again, the overall number now, because we're only targeting the entrant, the overall number of listings decreases. And this harms the consumer because consumers love variety. And so in the model, and so a few less entrant listings kind of decrease consumer welfare in that perspective. But this harm is still kind of more than compensated by the gain from faster social learning, but the gains are fairly limited. So in this counterfactual, the consumer gain is around 44,000 per month, and the total welfare increase is 21,000. And also Airbnb loses out in this counterfactual, by the way, because I mean they're gaining from the total host revenue, right? And if there are fewer hosts, then they're harmed. So here, like there is some gains to be done, but the gains are very limited when targeting only the entrant. All right, and with this, I'm basically done. I think I'm out of time. So just to conclude, we have estimated an empirical model of social learning using data on Airbnb. We do find that the cold start problem exists and it's quantitatively sizable, but we also find that these supply side responses matter, right, for the extent of the problem. And it's not that clear actually. So, and it depends on the specific intervention and how this intervention also affects entry and exit, right? Because consumers value variety. And we think that this is relevant beyond Airbnb because social learning matters for any platform that relies on peer-to-peer reviews, right? So we have similar mechanisms also on Amazon, Booking.com, and so on and so forth. All right, and with this, I conclude. Thank you so much for your attention.
Wonderful, thank you. And effectively, you took exactly 40 minutes because we took a few minutes at the beginning. So thank you.
Okay.
Imke, now it's on you.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Regina. I thought this was a great talk about a great paper. So that's wonderful. Yeah, so I just very quickly just want to start by singing a little bit of the praises of the paper. It's really impressive, right? I mean, it's got a lot of parts to it that are really hard to to juggle as well, but you guys are doing a really nice job, right? There's expectations of quality as influenced by ratings. There's dynamic pricing, entry, exit. And you're working on the outside option, and all of this as a function of the information and speed of learning. So it's really, there's a lot going on. And it was very it was also just really, really clearly presented. So I like that. The question is also interesting. You just got to that at the very end of this in the conclusion, right? It's interesting and important because, well, consumers seldomly know anything about new entrants. And, thanks to digitization, we have this situation now where we know a lot about products that have been around for a while, but not necessarily about the new ones. And it applies to creative content. It applies to restaurants and basically any service industry, really. So now we have the situation also because of digitization that there is hope. We can solve it, and maybe relatively quickly. So it's really nice, and it's so hard to get any kind of empirical evidence for this as well. So it's great that this paper is making some real strides there. Now, all of that said, I also wanted to give a little bit of my thoughts, of course, that are a little might be helpful. Hopefully, maybe not. We'll find out. But one thing that also kind of almost piggybacking off of what Chiara was saying, a little bit of this is there really a cold start problem here, right? In this particular situation, we have this, well, we actually know a lot about the listings that we see. In addition to ratings, we actually have access to the photos. And, part of this is ideally, I would love to see something where we use the photos to kind of predict how good a place is, or what ratings people would expect this place to give just based on how nice the pictures look or something like that, and how large the description is. Now, of course, I'm asking for a probably impossible data task here, but I just kind of wanted to bring that up there. It's like any kind of evidence that goes beyond, because this is in the model, then that says, yes, we really have this cold start problem in this situation. That would be wonderful. And then I kind of along these lines too, how long should the cold start problem last, right? You have a lot of analysis, but I was also just wondering overall, is it enough to just have one review? And actually then it depends on the text of the review too, right? It's like if the text is really detailed and descriptive, that would be, then that maybe solves the cold start problem quicker than if it just says nice place. Again, I know that that's not in the same data set, so there's a lot that needs to be done, and I'm definitely also want to just kind of acknowledge that it's already really a strong paper and a lot going on. The other assumption that's going on here, that's now especially in the model as well, is this idea that yes, the hosts price strategically. Now, I don't know how strategic they really are. I know some colleagues of yours at Toronto and now Carnegie Mellon are have this paper that says, well, actually, they don't really care about prices to begin with. So also some more evidence just on these kind of assumptions that go into the paper would be really wonderful. Then, yeah, I mean, I had just some small questions or comments as well. I'll share them, but maybe one other thing too about this exit or this active versus inactive. There's this question in the data as well about you can be limitedly active by just having your place available for a week while you're away or something, and as opposed to the entire month, and kind of thinking a little bit about just this idea of I just kind of wrote down this like limited availability being a thing potentially, and there's some things around those lines I thought would be really nice to explore given the monthly data. I'll share other notes as well. Overall, just kind of to summarize, I really enjoyed the paper, and I think it's about it's making some really good strides for a really important question. So I'm glad I got to read it.